It begins with a sound that is not so much a sound, but an event, a thunderclap of finality that hangs in the air for an eternity. A single E major piano chord, struck simultaneously by half a dozen hands on multiple pianos and a harmonium, then sustained by a wily studio engineer for over 40 seconds until it decays into the hiss of the very air in the room. It is the most definitive full stop in the history of popular music. And yet, it poses a question that has echoed for over half a century. How in the world did we get here? How did four young men from Liverpool, who just 3 years prior were singing, "She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah," arrive at this sonic monument? This is not just a song. This is a psychological document, a cultural artifact, and arguably the single most ambitious and transformative 5.5 minutes in the annals of recorded music. This is the story of A Day in the Life. To truly understand this piece of music is to understand a fundamental shift not just in the Beatles' career, but in the very consciousness of the era. If you are here, you are curious. You have heard the whispers, the legends. You know this is important. My purpose is to show you why. Forget what you think you know. We are going beyond the liner notes. This is your guide. And if you value this kind of deep, unflinching analysis, do me a favor right now. Subscribe to this channel, PsychProg. Like this video and share it. You will want to, once you see where we are going. The year is 1966. The Beatles, the most famous group of human beings on the planet, make a decision that is, in the pop world, commercial suicide. They quit touring. You must understand the context. In the mid-60s, bands toured to sell records. That was the formula. To abandon the road was to risk fading into obscurity. But for the Beatles, touring had become a farce. A soul-crushing pantomime played out to a soundtrack of unrelenting hysterical screaming that completely drowned out their music. They couldn't hear themselves play. The musicality was gone, replaced by the sheer deafening roar of their own fame. This, coupled with the logistical nightmares and very real threats on their lives, particularly after John Lennon's "more popular than Jesus" comment, made the decision inevitable. They were done with being mop-tops in a cage. They retreated into the one place they could control, the one place they could actually hear each other: EMI Studios on Abbey Road. This retreat was not a vacation. It was an act of liberation. The studio was no longer just a place to document songs. It became an instrument in itself, a laboratory for sonic alchemy. The pressure cooker of the road was replaced by the psychedelic expansion of the studio, fueled by a creative freedom they had never known. And let's be blunt, a significant intake of consciousness-altering substances. This is the fertile, febrile ground from which the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band would grow. And at its heart, as its grand, conclusive statement lay A Day in the Life. The song itself is a perfect reflection of the state of the band, specifically the duality of its two principal architects, John Lennon and Paul McCartney. By 1967, the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership was no longer the eyeball-to-eyeball collaboration of their early years. They were two increasingly distinct artistic personalities, often writing separately and bringing their fragments together. A Day in the Life is the most sublime example of this fractured synergy, a Frankenstein's monster of a song stitched together from two completely unrelated pieces of music. It is a tapestry woven from Lennon's surreal, detached ennui and McCartney's grounded workaday nostalgia. Lennon's contribution forms the song's main verses, the dreamlike narrative that opens and closes the piece, and its origin story is, in itself, a perfect snapshot of Lennon's creative process at the time. On January 17, 1967, he was at his piano in his Kenwood home, scanning the Daily Mail. Two stories caught his eye. The first, a report on the coroner's inquest into the death of a young man named Tara Brown. Brown was a 21-year-old heir to the Guinness fortune, a well-known figure in the London social scene, and a friend to both Lennon and McCartney. He had died in a car crash the previous month. Lennon, reading the details, began to spin them through his own unique psychedelic filter. I read the news today. Oh boy, about a lucky man who made the grade. The lucky man is a piece of classic Lennon irony, a detached comment on the absurdity of fame and fate. He takes the raw data of the accident. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed, and transmutes it. While Lennon later clarified that Tara Brown didn't literally blow his mind out, the phrase was in his head, a collision of the real event and the drug-infused language of the time. The second verse continues this feeling of detached observation. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. This captures the strange, impersonal nature of public tragedy, a spectacle for the masses. The song's third verse, I saw a film today, oh boy, the English army had just won the war, is another lift from Lennon's direct experience. In the autumn of 1966, he had taken his only non-musical acting role in Richard Lester's black comedy, How I Won the War. The experience of filming in Spain, away from the Beatle bubble, was a period of deep introspection for him. It was there he began wearing his iconic round glasses, and more importantly, where he wrote Strawberry Fields Forever, another masterpiece of psychedelic memory. The line in A Day in the Life isn't a literal celebration of victory. It's a jaded, almost sarcastic reference to the absurdity of the film he was in, filtered through that same dreamlike haze. Finally, the last verse finds its source in that very same edition of the Daily Mail. In a small news brief under the headline, The Holes in Our Roads, reported that a council survey in Blackburn, Lancashire, had counted 4,000 holes in the town's roads. Lennon, with mathematical whimsy, combines this mundane fact with the grandeur of a London landmark. I read the news today, oh boy. 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, and though the holes were rather small, they had to count them all. Now they know how many holes it takes to fill the Albert Hall. It's a breathtaking leap of surrealist logic, connecting the prosaic potholes of a northern town with the hallowed space of high culture. This is the world of John Lennon in early 1967. A man filtering the everyday ephemera of newspapers and personal experiences through a lens of acid-drenched detachment. He is the observer, floating above the scenes, reporting back with a sigh and a wry, oh boy. His melody drifts, following his stream of consciousness rooted in G major but with a hazy, melancholic quality. It is a stunning piece of songwriting on its own, but it was incomplete. Enter Paul McCartney. If Lennon was the dreamer, gazing at the clouds, McCartney was the master craftsman, his feet firmly on the ground. He arrived at the studio with a completely separate, unfinished song of his own, and it was a brisk, upbeat, almost frantic little vignette about his own daily routine. Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head, found my way downstairs and drank a cup. And looking up, I noticed I was late. Where Lennon's verses are ethereal, McCartney's section is startlingly tangible. It's a morning rush, a slice of life rendered in crisp cinematic detail. Found my coat and grabbed my hat. Made the bus in seconds flat. Found my way upstairs and had a smoke. And somebody spoke and I went into a dream. The detail is brilliant. A perfect miniature of a young man's life in London. The shift in key to a bright E major and the change in tempo is jarring. A sudden splash of cold water. Here we arrive at the song's central creative challenge, the point of tension that elevates it from a mere curiosity into a work of genius. They had two brilliant but utterly disparate song fragments. One, a melancholic psychedelic dreamscape. The other, a bustling, everyday sketch. How do you weld these two pieces together? How do you bridge the chasm between Lennon's G major dream and McCartney's E major reality? The initial solution was simple. An alarm clock, triggered by their roadie, Mal Evans, to serve as a jarring transition from Lennon's world into McCartney's. 20. A 24-bar musical bridge was left empty in the initial recording takes, a gaping hole in the middle of the track. This is where most bands would have given up or settled for a simple instrumental fill. But this was 1967, and the Beatles were not most bands. This is where the song pivots from being an excellent pop song to a revolutionary piece of art. The solution to filling that 24-bar gap would come not from guitars and drums, but from an audacious, avant-garde idea. Lennon, in his characteristically non-technical way, knew what he wanted it to feel like. He described it to producer George Martin as a tremendous build-up, from nothing up to something absolutely like the end of the world. McCartney, inspired by their shared interest in avant-garde composers like Karlheinz Stockhausen and John Cage, suggested something radical. Let the orchestra improvise. This is the point of suspension, the moment of supreme expectation. Imagine the scene. George Martin, the classically trained producer. Faced with the absurd task of translating the end of the world into a musical score for some of London's finest orchestral musicians, he knew that simply telling them to improvise would result in chaos. So he devised a stroke of genius. He wrote a loose score for the 40-piece orchestra he had hired. Uniquely for each instrument, he marked the lowest possible note they could play at the beginning of the 24-bar passage, and the highest possible note near an E major chord at the end. In between, he drew a simple rising squiggle, instructing each musician to slide from their bottom note to their top note at their own pace. As Martin himself recalled, the seasoned professionals looked at him as if he were completely mad. The recording session on February 10, 1967, was not a standard recording session. It was a happening. The Beatles invited a coterie of their famous friends, including members of the Rolling Stones, Donovan, and Michael Nesmith of the Monkees, to witness the event. To break the formal stuffiness of the orchestra, the musicians who arrived in tuxedos were given party hats, fake noses, and other novelties to wear. The lead violinist, Eric Grunberg, wore a gorilla paw. A bassoonist had a balloon attached to the end of his instrument. It was a psychedelic circus, a deliberate attempt to shake the classical players out of their comfort zones and encourage them to embrace the spirit of chaotic creation. McCartney and Martin took turns conducting this anarchic symphony. The result was recorded 4 separate times and then overdubbed onto a single track, creating the sound of a colossal 160-piece orchestra climbing a mountain of sound. The effect is terrifying and exhilarating. It's the sound of a collective anxiety attack, a sonic representation of a mind being blown, a terrifying, beautiful, atonal slide into the unknown. It is the perfect, terrifying bridge between Lennon's dream and McCartney's reality. After McCartney's verse, the orchestra returns, this time launching us back into Lennon's final, haunting verse about the holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. And then comes the final, crucial line, a line Lennon credited to McCartney, a line that sealed the song's controversial fate. "I'd love to turn you on." It was this line, more than anything else, that got the song banned by the BBC. Leafy in the era of Timothy Leary's turn on, tune in, drop out. The phrase was an unambiguous reference to the psychedelic drug experience. The BBC's director of sound broadcasting declared it could encourage a permissive attitude to drug taking. The Beatles publicly feigned innocence, with Lennon dryly suggesting the electricity board should also be banned for telling people to switch on. But privately, they knew exactly what they were doing. McCartney admitted it was a deliberate provocation. It was a direct challenge to the establishment, a knowing wink to the burgeoning counterculture. This leads us to that final apocalyptic chord. After the second orchestral tsunami, a chasm of silence. The original idea was to end with the group and their guests humming a chord, but it felt anticlimactic. So, on February 22nd, they gathered in the studio for one last monumental effort. Lennon, McCartney, Ringo Starr, and their roadie Mal Evans sat at 3 different pianos, 2 grands and an upright, while George Martin manned a harmonium. On McCartney's count, they all struck a powerful E major chord simultaneously. Getting 10 hands to hit the chord at the exact same instant took 9 attempts, but the real magic was in the recording. Engineer Jeff Emmerich, a true unsung hero of this era, performed a masterful feat. As the natural decay of the chord began to fade, he slowly pushed the faders on the recording console higher and higher, compressing the signal and riding the gain. This act of engineering wizardry stretched the chord's sustain for more than 40 seconds, making it feel infinite. As you listen to the fade, the volume is so high that you can hear the ambient sounds of the studio, the hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of a paper, emerging from the depths like ghosts in the machine. It is not an ending. It is a dissolution, a final resonant sigh after the grand statement. If you've stuck with me this far, it's clear you're not just a casual listener. You're invested. And for that, I again ask you to support Psych Prog. Subscribe, like, and please share this exploration with anyone who believes music can be more than just a product. Let's spread this deeper understanding. So what does it all mean? A day in the life is far more than the sum of its parts. It is a profound meditation on the nature of perception. It seamlessly blends the tragic, the mundane, the surreal, and the philosophical. It's a song about how we process the world around us, through news reports of distant tragedies, through fleeting personal memories, through the absurdities of art and statistics. Lennon's detached, floating perspective is the dream state, while McCartney's section is the waking world of routine and responsibility. The orchestral glissandos are the chaotic, terrifying, and exhilarating moments of transition between these states of consciousness. And the final line, "I'd love to turn you on," is the key. It is an invitation to shift your own perception, to see the world not as a series of disconnected events, but as a flowing, interconnected, and often deeply strange whole. By placing this track at the very end of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the Beatles did more than just finish an album. They slammed the door on an entire era of pop music and threw open a new one. They proved that a pop song could have the weight and complexity of a classical symphony, the ambiguity of a modernist poem, and the psychological depth of a great novel. They took the 3-minute song format and shattered it into 1,000 pieces, then reassembled it into a masterpiece of art rock that has never been equaled. It is not a song you simply listen to. It is a song you experience. It demands your attention. It challenges your expectations, and it rewards you with a glimpse into the boundless possibilities of sound. It is a high-water mark of 20th century art, created in a crucible of unprecedented fame, artistic freedom, and psychedelic exploration. The story of its creation is the story of a band at the absolute zenith of its powers, daring to fail, and in doing so, achieving a success so profound that it continues to resonate, like that final piano chord, long after the initial impact has faded. It is, quite simply, a universe in 5.5 minutes. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into a true monument of music. If this journey has resonated with you, I urge you to subscribe to Psych Prog. There are more stories, more dissections, and more musical rabbit holes waiting for you in our other videos. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Until then, keep listening, and keep listening deeply.
There is a particular kind of beauty that only exists at the edge of collapse. Structural engineers know it. Surgeons know it. The human body, in the final stages of exhaustion, sometimes produces a clarity of function so precise that it resembles perfect health. Musicians know this too, though they rarely speak of it in clinical terms. They speak instead of inspired sessions, magical recordings, and the ineffable chemistry of a band locked in. But what they are describing, if they are honest, is the phenomenon of dissolution producing its most concentrated output at the precise moment before everything becomes irreversible. This is the true subject of Because, the penultimate vocal performance on Abbey Road, and the only honest way to understand what is happening in those 2 minutes and 45 seconds is to understand the precise conditions under which it was created, not as mythology, not as hagiography, but as a clinical observation of musicians under extreme professional and personal pressure choosing, one final time, to subordinate their individual concerns to a collective harmonic purpose that required nothing less than absolute concentration. By the summer of 1969, when the Beatles convened at EMI Studios in Abbey Road to record what would become their final album as a working band, the fraying of their professional relationships had accelerated to a dangerous pace. The Get Back sessions earlier that year, filmed in their entirety at Twickenham Film Studios, and subsequently at Apple Corps headquarters, had documented weeks of friction, discomfort, and creative disconnection. Arguments about management, about publishing, about the direction of the music and the structure of the business filled the tape. George Harrison had walked out entirely on January 10th, only returning after negotiations. Yet what followed in the spring and summer of those same 12 months was, by nearly every account, a demonstrably more cohesive and productive creative environment. George Martin, who had agreed to return as producer on the strict condition that the sessions be conducted with the discipline of earlier years, later described the Abbey Road period as genuinely collaborative, a conscious effort to recapture the craft and collective purpose that had made their earlier records great. This nuance is essential to understanding because the song was not produced in spite of harmony between its performers. It was produced through a difficult, painstaking, deliberate reconstruction of that harmony, and the distinction matters enormously. The main recording session for Because took place on August 1st, 1969. It was, though none of the participants knew it at the time, the final occasion on which all 4 Beatles began recording a new song together. The backing track, Lennon on electric guitar, McCartney on bass, and George Martin on an electric spinet Baldwin harpsichord, required 23 takes before take 16 was selected as the best. To keep time during recording, Ringo Starr provided hand claps on track 4 as a guide, a reference rhythm that was never intended for the final mix and was duly removed. 3 days later, on August 4th, the 3 vocal harmonies were recorded, overdubbed twice to create the 9-voice texture that defines the song. On August 5th, Harrison recorded the Moog synthesizer part twice, filling the final 2 available tracks on the tape and completing the last element committed to record for the entire Abbey Road album. The vocal overdubs alone required more than 5 hours of sustained, exhausting concentration. Engineer Jeff Emmerich, who witnessed the sessions firsthand, later recalled that John, Paul, and George Harrison sat in a semicircle with Ringo present, but not performing, offering silent moral support, and that the atmosphere was one of total seriousness and total focus, with no clowning, no distractions, and no willingness to accept anything less than precision. He described it as seeing the 4 Beatles at their finest. To understand why the vocal arrangement of Because functions as a technical marvel, one must first understand what is actually being asked of the singers in anatomical terms. The human vocal apparatus is not a fixed-pitch instrument. Unlike a piano, where the frequency of each note is determined mechanically, the voice produces pitch through an extraordinarily complex coordination of laryngeal muscles, breath pressure, and resonant cavity shaping governed by neurological feedback loops, operating faster than conscious thought. When a singer sustains a note within a harmonic context, the brain is constantly receiving acoustic information about the frequencies produced by the surrounding voices and making continuous microscopic adjustments to maintain the mathematical relationships that define consonants. This process is largely unconscious in trained singers, but it is never passive. It demands active, uninterrupted engagement with the sound environment of the room. Now consider the specific harmonic intervals that Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison were required to sustain throughout Because. The song is built in C-sharp minor, and the chords in the progression include close-voiced intervals, minor seconds, major sevenths, and diminished fifths, that are acoustically unstable by nature. These intervals sit at the edge of what the Western ear categorizes as consonant, producing audible beating frequencies when tuning is imprecise. 3 men had to maintain these intervals with a consistency of intonation that modern pitch correction software can barely match after the fact, not for 1 pass, but for 3 complete overdubs, each demanding the same microscopic accuracy. According to George Martin, he was, in his own words, literally telling them which notes to sing, specifying each part of the 3-voice harmony with a precision that left nothing to chance. The technical execution of what he specified was entirely theirs. The assignment of vocal registers in Because follows the natural timbral hierarchy of the 3 voices as they had been refined over a decade of ensemble singing. McCartney, possessing the highest and most clarion register of the 3, took the upper harmony, reaching toward the ceiling of his chest voice. Lennon, whose voice had the lower mid-range anchor that had defined his role in complex harmonies from the earliest years of the band, provided the foundational harmonic color. Harrison, occupying the most technically challenging middle position, the voice that must remain in constant acoustic negotiation with both the voice above and below it, supplied the inner harmony that transformed 2 voices into a true chord. This tripartite organization had deep roots in the band's history, traceable through early 3-part works like This Boy and Yes It Is, but Because represents its most sophisticated deployment. The resulting texture, 9 voices blended from 3 passes, was described by multiple participants and witnesses as overwhelming, less like a rock band, and more like a choir operating at the extreme edge of human tonal density. McCartney and Harrison both later cited Because as their personal favorite track on the album. The decision to build the harmonic foundation on an electric spinet Baldwin harpsichord rather than a piano is among the most consequential timbral choices in the entire Beatles catalog, and it receives far less analytical attention than it deserves. The harpsichord belongs to a tradition of keyboard writing predating the piano by nearly 2 centuries, the instrument for which Bach wrote his well-tempered clavier, the instrument that defined the sonic world of the Baroque. Its character differs from the piano in ways carrying direct compositional implications, where the piano produces a warm sustain that fills harmonic space with overlapping frequencies. The harpsichord delivers a bright, percussive attack with a rapid decay. The note arrives and retreats immediately, defining the moment of harmonic contact without lingering. This has a specific psychological consequence in because, where a piano accompaniment would cushion the voices with continuous harmonic support, the harpsichord instead creates a series of precisely placed markers and then withdraws, leaving the voices acoustically exposed between each arpeggiated attack. Every moment between the harpsichord's figures is a moment where the harmonies hang in the air, supported by nothing except the integrity of the singer's intonation. George Martin, in his own account of the session, described the challenge of duplicating Lennon's guitar figure note for note on the harpsichord as technically demanding, requiring Ringo's guide rhythm in their headphones to maintain alignment. The instrument was selected not for convenience, but for the quality of controlled Baroque coldness it imparted to the arrangement, a quality that prevented the song from drifting into the sentimental warmth that a Steinway would have introduced. It sounds, as many have observed, simultaneously Baroque and modern, beautiful, precise, and faintly synthetic. The Moog synthesizer that George Harrison played on August 5th represents one of the most restrained applications of the instrument in the Beatles' catalog. The year 1969 was the moment when synthesizers began their conquest of the recording studio, and the temptation to use this technology as a demonstration of its own capabilities was nearly irresistible for most musicians who encountered it. Wendy Carlos had already demonstrated on Switched On Bach that the instrument could simulate a full orchestra. The cultural pressure on any musician who touched a Moog was to use it maximally, to show what it could do. Harrison did the opposite. He programmed the instrument to produce a sustained melodic line with a tone approximating a French horn, but with an icy artificial sustain that no human lung could maintain. And he deployed this single sound only at the points the composition required. He did not solo. He did not modulate through its timbral range. He found one color that served the emotional purpose of the song and used only that color, recorded twice across the final two available tracks. This was, incidentally, the first time the Moog had been used in any Abbey Road recording session. That Harrison chose his debut appearance with the instrument in that context, to demonstrate restraint rather than spectacle, tells you something precise about the aesthetic maturity the song demanded of everyone involved. The production philosophy of George Martin and engineer Jeff Emmerich for Because operates on a spatial logic that inverts many conventions of rock recording. The vocals were recorded and mixed with minimal reverb, bringing them forward in the stereo field to a position of almost uncomfortable intimacy. You are not listening to three men singing from a stage. You are positioned by the mix at very close range to three human throats. You can hear the physical air of the consonants. The instruments, by contrast, the harpsichord, Lennon's guitar through its Leslie speaker, the Moog, occupy what sounds like a significantly more expansive acoustic space, as if emanating from a room beyond the one in which the singers stand. This inversion creates a three-dimensional stereo image that is unusual in pop recording. The voices are close, corporeal, and intensely present, while the harmonic universe they inhabit seems to extend far beyond any domestic boundary. The listener is placed in an acoustically paradoxical position, simultaneously intimate with the physical act of singing and remote from the harmonic world that singing inhabits. It is a mix that rewards genuine attention on any equipment and rewards high-fidelity equipment with something approaching a physical presence in the room. The lyrics of Because have been subjected to the full condescension that attaches itself to any artistic output associated with the countercultural late 1960s. Because the world is round, it turns me on. The wind is high, it blows my mind. The sky is blue, it makes me cry. On the surface, this is the grammar of a child. Subject, verb, consequence. No metaphorical density, no intertextual complexity. But this reading misses the philosophical project entirely, because what the text performs is not naivety, but deliberate reduction. By 1969, the idealistic framework of the decade had been repeatedly and brutally falsified by events, political assassinations, the collapse of Altamont, the Vietnam War continuing without accountability. The retreat into elemental observation that the lyrics perform is not ignorance of this context. It is a chosen response to it. The world is round. That proposition does not require political agreement or social consensus. It cannot be contested, co-opted, or made false by the failure of a movement. The sky is blue. The wind is high. These are the only propositions the lyric is willing to make, and by making only these propositions, By refusing to assert anything that requires a social world to remain intact in order to be true, the lyric achieves a kind of existential resilience. Lennon himself said the lyrics speak for themselves, that there was no imagery, no obscure reference, just the statements as given. This was not impoverishment. It was the most rigorous intellectual honesty available to a songwriter in that particular historical moment. What Because ultimately documents is not only the technical achievement of its vocal arrangement, or the compositional sophistication of its harmony, or the production intelligence of its spatial mix. It documents something rarer and more valuable, the capacity of human beings to transcend the conditions of their own exhaustion through the act of collective attention. Musicians who were managing the disintegration of a decade-long collaboration could not have made this alone. They needed each other to do it, and that need was greater, for the duration of those sessions, than every business dispute and every creative tension that was simultaneously complicating everything around them. Jeff Emerick said they knew they were doing something special, and they were determined to get it right. The proof is in the recording. Listen again. Let the harpsichord begin. Let the 9 voices find each other in the architecture of C-sharp minor. Understand that what you are hearing is the sound of people choosing, under real pressure and with full concentration, to hold together long enough to make something that will never fall apart at all.
Is it possible that the single greatest technical and emotional magic trick in the history of recorded sound was born not from divine inspiration, but from a neurotic inability to make a decision and a terrified refusal to face reality? To truly approach the monolith that is Strawberry Fields Forever, you have to stop listening to it as a pop song. You must strip away the decades of radio play, the cultural calcification, and the image of 4 lovable mop-tops shaking their heads on the Ed Sullivan Show. By the freezing winter of late 1966, that band was dead. The 4 men who walked into EMI studios at Abbey Road were tired, cynical, chemically altered, and possessed by a terrifying artistic arrogance that demanded the impossible from machines that were never designed to deliver it. You want to understand why this track is a masterpiece? It is not because it is pretty. It is a masterpiece because it is a lie. It is a sonic hallucination stitched together from 2 completely different realities, forced to coexist by the sheer will of genius and the brute force of a razor blade. It represents the precise moment where the recording studio ceased to be a room, where a performance was documented, and became an instrument in itself, as vital, volatile, and expressive as the guitar or the piano. We must first understand the psychological terrain. John Lennon did not bring a song to the studio. He brought a neurosis. He brought a fragment of a memory, a childhood refuge in the overgrown Gothic grounds of a Salvation Army children's home in Liverpool, named Strawberry Field. But do not be fooled by the geography. This song is not about a place. It is not a nostalgic postcard. It is a terrifying confession of an internal state of disjointed reality. It is about the sensation of knowing, with absolute certainty, that you are insane, or perhaps that you are the only sane person in a world of sleepwalkers. The brilliance lies in how the music does not merely accompany that feeling. It physically replicates the sensation of a dissolving ego through the manipulation of electricity and air pressure. To understand the sonic architecture, we must begin with the machine that defines the song's opening breath, the Mellotron Mech 2. In the modern era, where digital synthesizers can replicate a symphony orchestra with the push of a button, it is difficult to grasp the sheer mechanical audacity of the Mellotron. In 1967, this was not a synthesizer. It was a beast of springs, motors, and magnetic tape. When Paul McCartney pressed a key on that keyboard, he was not triggering a microchip. He was engaging a physical mechanism that pulled a strip of magnetic tape across a playback head. That flute sound you hear in the intro? That is not a synthetic approximation. That is a recording of a real flautist, frozen on tape, degraded by the machine's primitive mechanics, and resurrected by McCartney's fingers. The sound is ghostly, warbly, and detached because it is detached. The tapes inside the Mellotron had a finite length of about 8 seconds. If you held the note too long, the tape would run out, and a spring would snap it back to the beginning. This limitation forced a specific style of playing: staccato, careful, fearful. The tuning was never perfect. The motor speed fluctuated. causing the pitch to waver slightly, creating a natural chorusing effect that no digital pedal has ever perfectly emulated. This intro sets the listener in a space that is neither acoustic nor electronic. It is the uncanny valley of sound. It tells your brain immediately, you are not in a room with a band anymore. You are inside someone's head. It functions as a portal. The specific timbre of those flutes, breathy, slightly dull, lacking the bright high-end frequencies of a live instrument, establishes a mood of dusty, attic-bound memory. It is the sound of looking at a photograph that is curling at the edges. Now we must look at the harmonic structure, for this is where Lennon weaponizes music theory against the listener. If you are a guitar player, you know the profound frustration of trying to pin this song down. The ambiguity is deliberate. Lennon is utilizing non-functional harmony to destroy your sense of a tonal center. The verse starts with a statement, but immediately descends chromatically. This is the passus duriusculus, the hard step, a musical device used since the Baroque period to signify grief, pain, or falling. But Lennon doesn't resolve it cleanly. He throws in chords that shouldn't work but do because of the voice leading. When he sings, "No one I think is in my tree," the chord progression leaves the listener suspended. The harmony refuses to land. It floats. It mimics the lyrical hesitation. I mean, it must be high or low. He is musically stuttering. Most songwriters want to project confidence. Lennon used music theory, intuitively, not academically, which makes it more potent, to project confusion. The use of the flat 7 chord against the major tonic creates a mixolydian flavor that feels like a blues. But the melody is strictly horizontal, almost chanting. It is a drone dressed up as a pop song. The harmonic rhythm, the speed at which the chords change, is erratic. It speeds up and slows down, mirroring the racing thoughts of a mind under the influence of LSD. This is not drug music for the sake of being trippy. It is a clinical replication of the psychedelic experience, where linear time collapses and logic becomes fluid. But the true insanity, the thing that separates the men from the boys in the annals of music history, is the rhythm section. We need to talk about Ringo Starr. For decades, fools have dismissed him as a lucky amateur. Strawberry Fields Forever is his vindication and his monument. Listen to the drums. They do not just keep time, they narrate the chaos. The kit was subjected to Jeff Emmerich's radical engineering techniques, close miking the drums, which was technically forbidden by EMI rules at the time, and dampening the heads heavily, likely with tea towels or by removing the bottom heads to kill the resonance. It sounds like he is hitting wet cardboard or heavy logs. It is a dead thudding sound that occupies a specific narrow frequency range, leaving room for the orchestral madness on top. But it is what he plays that matters. The fills are backward. I do not mean the tape is reversed, though the cymbals are later. I mean his phrasing goes against the grain of standard 4/4 rock drumming. He creates a stumbling, rolling feel, a polyrhythmic texture that feels like falling down the stairs in slow motion. He locks in with the cellos and brass, not just the bass guitar. This is crucial. Ringo isn't playing with the band, he's playing with the orchestra. His fill leading into the second verse is a sprawling, tom-heavy tumble that feels like the ground giving way beneath your feet. It creates a sensation of vertigo. He is painting with the drums, using them for tonal color rather than just meter. Without this specific drum performance, the song would collapse under its own weight. It anchors the surrealism in a visceral, physical thud. And here is where we get to the miracle. The song you hear on the radio does not exist. It is a Frankenstein's monster, a corpse sewn together from two incompatible bodies. The Beatles recorded the song twice. The first version, let's call it Take 7, was a stripped-back, dreamy affair. It had the mellotron, the slide guitar, a gentle, stoned vibe. It was beautiful, intimate, and fragile. It was recorded in the key of a major. But Lennon, being the dissatisfied perfectionist he was, went to producer George Martin days later and said it wasn't heavy enough. He didn't mean heavy metal. He meant weighty, substantial, crushing. He wanted brass. He wanted cellos. He wanted the apocalypse. So they went back in and recorded Take 26. This version was a beast, aggressive trumpets, screaming cellos, a frantic, driving rhythm. The arrangement was dense, cacophonous, and aggressive. Crucially, this version was faster and recorded in the key of B major, likely played in C with the instruments tuned down or using a capo, but sounding in B. Here is the problem that would define the track. Lennon listened to both. He liked the beginning of the first version, take 7, with its intimacy and the gentle mellotron intro, but he liked the end of the second version, take 26, with the orchestral storm. He turned to George Martin and said, "Join them together." For any audio engineer in the analog era, this request is a death sentence. It is a physical impossibility. You cannot just splice two takes together if they are in different keys and different tempos. Take 7 was in A, take 26 was in B. They were mathematically incompatible. If you splice them, the pitch jumps, the rhythm jerks, and the illusion fails. The listener would hear the edit. It would sound like a mistake. But George Martin and his engineer Jeff Emmerich utilized the one variable they could control, variable speed, or vari-speed. They realized the physics of the tape machine offered a loophole. If they sped up the first take, take 7, the pitch would rise from A towards BB. If they slowed down the second take, take 26, the pitch would fall from B down towards BB. By the grace of the audio gods, or perhaps sheer blind luck, the intersection point where both takes hit a compatible key, roughly B-flat, though slightly detuned, also happened to be the point where their tempos matched. Listen to the track at exactly 60 seconds in. 1 crowler. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to... cut. That is the splice. It happens right around the word going. The timbre of Lennon's voice changes instantly. In the first minute, he sounds younger, lighter, more distinct because the tape is sped up. After the cut, his voice becomes slurred, thick, heavy. This is because the second half of the song is playing significantly slower than it was recorded. This is critical to the song's emotional impact. The formants of his voice, the physical resonance of the throat and chest, are shifted down. This accidental artifact created a drugged vocal sound that psychedelic bands spent the next decade trying to copy with effects units. The Beatles did it with physics. The cellos sound groggy because they are being stretched. The drums sound massive because the decay of the hit is elongated by the slowing of the tape. This creates a sludge in the low end that feels oppressive and heavy. The mistake became the aesthetic. The song literally gets heavier as it goes on, sinking into a molasses of slowed down time. This mimics the lyrical journey from the tree, the observer, down to the ground, the reality. The technology is not just capturing the song, it is telling the story. Let's talk about the swarm and dial. That harp-like sound you hear bridging the verses, it's an Indian zither that George Harrison had begun to master. It wasn't just a fashion statement. It introduced the concept of microtonal bending and non-Western scales to the Beatles' palette. The swarmandal provides a descending glissando that acts as a palette cleanser. It wipes the harmonic memory of the listener so they can accept the next weird chord change. It is a texture, not a melody. It adds to the dream logic of the track. It sounds ancient, contrasting with the futuristic tape manipulation. This tension between the ancient Indian strings and the futuristic vari-speed tape creates a timeless vacuum where the song exists. The orchestration itself is George Martin at his absolute peak. He didn't just write a string pad to make it sound pretty. He wrote aggressive, biting lines. The trumpets and horns are playing distinct rhythmic stabs that fight against the rhythm section. This is dissonance used as texture. In the second half of the song, the slowed down take 26, the arrangement becomes dense, almost claustrophobic. You have backward cymbals sucking the air out of the mix, a sound that has no attack, only a swell, which disorients the brain's temporal processing. You hear the sound before you hear the cause. It reverses cause and effect. This is a subtle psychoacoustic trick that makes the listener feel unmoored, drifting. We must also give credit to Paul McCartney's bass playing. On this track, the bass is not a rhythm instrument. It is a lead instrument. The tone is warm, woolly, and heavily compressed, anchoring the floating elements above it. But look at the lines he plays. He is playing a counter-melody. He weaves in and out of the vocal line, filling the gaps, conversing with Lennon. It is a melodic duet between the voice and the bass. In the context of 1967, this was revolutionary. Bass players were supposed to hold down the root notes. McCartney was painting. His playing in the chorus, specifically the descending run, adds a driving momentum that propels the song forward, even as the tape speed tries to drag it back. And then, the coda, the false ending. The song fades out. The listener relaxes. The journey is over. And then a wall of noise fades back in. This was an act of sonic terrorism. In 1967, the fade-out was a convention to hide the fact that the band didn't know how to end the song. It was a polite way to leave the room. Here, the Beatles used the fade-out as a weapon. The music that returns is pure distinct chaos. It is free jazz. It is avant-garde. You hear wild percussion, the mellotron freaking out on the swing setting, a built-in rhythm loop that sounds manic, and swirling textures of noise. This coda is the sound of the mind completely unraveling. It denies you resolution. It tells you that the strawberry fields are not a peaceful garden, but a place of madness. Lennon mutters something at the end, famously misheard as, "I buried Paul," fueling the Paul is dead conspiracy, but actually, cranberry sauce. The banality of the phrase cranberry sauce juxtaposed with the nightmare soundscape is pure Dadaism. It highlights the absurdity of the entire enterprise. Why is this an instrumentalist's masterpiece when the playing isn't technically flashy in the way a Van Halen solo is? Because it understands that timbre is more important than notes. A virtuoso can play 1,000 notes a minute, but if the tone is sterile, it means nothing. Strawberry Fields Forever is a masterclass in tonal sculpting. Every frequency is carved out. The decision to pan the drums hard, the way the vocals sit deeply in the mix rather than floating on top, it creates an immersive environment. You don't listen to this song, you step inside it. It has a humidity, it has a temperature. Consider the risk involved. This was a pop band. Their fans were teenage girls who wanted She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. The Beatles handed them a song with no chorus hook, a terrifying orchestral breakdown, inconsistent keys, and lyrics about insanity and existential doubt. It was an act of commercial suicide that turned out to be artistic immortality. They treated their audience with respect. They assumed the listener could handle the complexity. They demanded that the pop song grow up. Furthermore, we must address the guitar work, specifically the slide guitar. George Harrison's contribution here is subtle but vital. He plays a slide line that sounds like a weeping bird. It is not bluesy, it is almost microtonal, mimicking the Indian influence but on a Western instrument. It weaves through the verses, adding a shimmering liquid quality. It reinforces the theme of fluidity, of things slipping through your fingers. The guitar tone is heavily compressed, lacking sharp attack, blending seamlessly with the mellotron. It is difficult to tell where the guitar ends and the keyboard begins. This blurring of lines is central to the song's identity. The production techniques used on Strawberry Fields Forever laid the groundwork for everything that came after. The use of varispeed, backward tapes, heavy compression, and close miking of acoustic instruments became the vocabulary of modern recording. But in 1967, there was no manual. They were inventing the language as they spoke it. Jeff Emerick was breaking the rules of EMI, risking his job to get the microphone closer to the violin strings than was technically allowed, to capture the grit of the bow. They were abusing the equipment to get a visceral reaction. When you listen to the song today, you are hearing the sound of analog tape being pushed to its breaking point. You can hear the hiss. You can hear the saturation. This is not a flaw. It is the soul of the recording. Digital recording is a grid. It is perfect, clean, and often sterile. Strawberry Fields Forever is an organism. It breathes. The tape speed manipulation means that the timing is never perfectly on the grid. It pushes and pulls. It has a human pulse even in its most mechanical moments. The Strawberry Fields of the title is a paradox. It is a real place, yes, but in the song, it is a state of non-existence. Nothing is real. This is the key line. The music serves this lyric. If nothing is real, then the music shouldn't be real either. It shouldn't sound like a band in a room. It should sound like a dream. The genius of the Beatles was realizing that the recording studio was the only place where they could construct a reality that was more potent than the one outside. They built a cathedral of sound to house a nervous breakdown. We must also reflect on the cultural impact. This song was released as a double A-side with Penny Lane. Penny Lane is the perfect counterpoint. Bright, crisp, observant, external, and hyper-realistic. Strawberry Fields is dark, murky, introspective, internal, and surreal. Together, they represent the two hemispheres of the human brain, or perhaps the two sides of Liverpool. But Strawberry Fields is the one that points to the future. Penny Lane perfected the past. Strawberry Fields invented the future. It opened the door for Pink Floyd, for Led Zeppelin, for Radiohead, for Tame Impala. It legitimized the idea that rock music could be high art, that it could deal with the darkest corners of the human psyche without losing its melodic power. The song is a loop. It ends with a fade out and a fade in, suggesting that the madness never really stops. It just recedes for a moment. It traps the listener. Even the structure is circular. It doesn't have a traditional bridge. It just cycles through verses and choruses, drilling deeper and deeper into the same harmonic obsession. It is relentless. In the end, what makes Strawberry Fields Forever a masterpiece is its bravery. It is the sound of four men standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the void of their own fame and their own minds, and deciding to jump. They didn't know if the parachute would open. They didn't know if the tape splice would hold. They didn't know if the audience would follow them. But they jumped anyway, and in doing so, they dragged the rest of the world down with them, into the beautiful, terrifying, multicolored darkness. So, the next time you hear that flute intro, do not just hum along. Listen to the mechanics. Listen to the struggle. Listen to the sound of a band destroying itself to create something eternal. Listen to the sound of the razor blade cutting the tape, severing the past from the future. That is the sound of a masterpiece. It is the sound of the impossible becoming inevitable. It is the sound of Strawberry Fields, and it is indeed forever. What if a simple melody, drifting through cosmic lyrics and layered with Eastern drones that bend time itself, could capture the Beatles' fractured genius at its most vulnerable peak, turning a song of personal turmoil into an anthem that still pulls at the threads of the universe, daring you to listen deeper and feel the raw pull of creation's edge. Across the Universe emerges as the Beatles' haunting testament to transcendence, a track that distills John Lennon's restless mind into a sonic tapestry where modal ambiguities and ethereal timbres collide, proving that true masterpieces arise from chaos rather than polished perfection. As a guitarist who spent years chasing the subtle resonances of slide work and the intricate polyrhythms of progressive rock giants like Genesis or Gentle Giant, those extended suites with shifting keys and leitmotifs that demand precision and passion, I view this song not as filler in their catalog, but as a forge where Lennon's lyrical introspection met the band's experimental fire, forging something immortal. If the hum of a tambura draws you in, or the swell of orchestral strings stirs unrest, yet you haven't unpacked the harmonic tensions or recording battles behind it, let's dive headlong. This exploration will equip you to hear its layers anew. Crank that original mix. Let the drones wash over, and discover how it fuels your own creative urges, because embracing its unfiltered truths reveals rock's power to bridge the mundane and the infinite, pushing you to confront your own cosmic wanderings without apology. The song's origins trace to early 1968, when Lennon, amid marital strife with Cynthia, channeled a late-night argument into poetry that evoked universal flow. Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. Inspired by transcendental meditation under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the lyrics weave mantra-like repetition with vivid imagery. The refrain, "Nothing's gonna change my world," serving as both affirmation and irony. It's Jai Guru Deva Om invoking divine grace amid earthly mess. Musically, Lennon built it on a D major framework, but with modal inflections drawing from Indian ragas, the melody floating over a droning tambura that sustains a root fifth interval, creating harmonic ambiguity that eschews traditional resolution. This wasn't mere exoticism. Lennon's immersion in Shankar's sitar lessons embedded microtonal bends into the fabric, challenging the diatonic rigidity of Western pop. The initial recording at Abbey Road captured this raw. Lennon's acoustic guitar strumming a gentle 4/4 pulse, Paul's piano adding sparse block chords, George's tambura providing the hypnotic bedrock, and Ringo's subtle tom rolls evoking distant thunder. Yet the session's chaos, fangirls recruited for backing vocals, their high-pitched harmonies on the refrain, mirrored the band's internal fractures, Lennon's perfectionism clashing with the others' fatigue. The atmosphere in the studio during those February days reflected broader strains, with the Beatles navigating the aftermath of Brian Epstein's death and the launch of Applecore, their idealistic venture that quickly devolved into financial quagmires. Released first on the 1969 charity compilation, No One's Gonna Change Our World, this version stripped bare the song's essence. A wildlife soundscape intro with birdsong transitioning into the tambura's hum, the tempo languid at around 76 BPM, allowing lyrics to breathe amid minimal instrumentation. George's sitar glissandos in the bridge introduce chromatic tension, sliding through quarter tones that mimic the sarade's expressive bends, while the verse's descending melody in mixolydian mode, flattening the seventh, lends a folk-like melancholy. As an instrumentalist, I've replicated that tambura drone on guitar, holding open strings to let overtones ring, and it motivates because it shows how simplicity amplifies depth. No need for pyrotechnics when a sustained note can evoke eternity. This mix's realism hits hard. The Beatles weren't untouchable gods, but flawed creators. Lennon's vocal cracks revealing vulnerability that later productions masked. The charity release, benefiting the World Wildlife Fund, aligned the song's natural imagery with environmental themes. The bird song not just atmospheric, but symbolic of fragile harmony in a turbulent world. By 1970's Let It Be album, Phil Spector reworked it into orchestral grandeur, his wall of sound piling strings, harp glissandi, and choral swells over the core, transforming the intimate dirge into a symphonic hymn. Lennon praised Spector's efforts for salvaging the track, though he had been unhappy with the earlier recording's lack of focus and out-of-tune elements. Spector's additions, violas doubling the melody in octaves, cellos providing counterpoint, create polyphonic texture, the arrangement building from piano intro to full crescendo, dynamics shifting from piano to forte in waves that mirror the lyrics' endless flow. Spector's hand amplified the song's progressive leanings, akin to how King Crimson might layer mellotron over guitar for atmospheric depth. The harp's arpeggiated runs in the outro evoke celestial ascent, harmonic inversions resolving in major lifts that symbolize enlightenment, while the choir's multi-tracked OMs add gospel fervor, blending Eastern mysticism with Western choral traditions. This direct clash, Lennon's minimalist vision versus Spector's excess, underscores the song's masterpiece status. It thrives in multiplicity, each iteration revealing new facets. Spector's involvement came during the Get Back project's Salvage, where he overdubbed orchestras on several tracks. His style, honed on girl group hits, clashing with the band's back-to-basics intent, yet elevating the song's emotional scope through lush arrangements that reward close listening. The 2003 Let It Be Naked remix stripped Spector's overlays, restoring the 1968 core with faster tempo at 78 BPM. Paul's bass lines more prominent in walking patterns that interlock with Ringo's maraca shuffles, creating subtle syncopation. George's electric guitar fills, with wah-wah filtered bends, add psychedelic edge, the tone shaped by compression to sustain notes indefinitely. This version's clarity highlights Lennon's vocal phrasing, melismatic extensions on universe, stretching vowels over multiple beats, drawing from raga improvisation where ornamentation conveys emotion. As a prog aficionado, I see parallels to Yes Roundabout, where acoustic foundations explode into electric complexity. But here the restraint motivates, master the basics, and the cosmos unfolds. The naked mix's realism strips illusions. The Beatles' magic stemmed from tension, not harmony, urging you to embrace creative conflicts in your own pursuits. Produced by Paul McCartney and engineers, this remix aimed to recapture the live essence of the original sessions, removing reverb-heavy additions to let the instruments breathe. The bass upper register fills, adding lightness that contrasts the song's weighty themes. Lyrically, the song's power lies in its unapologetic blend of personal and universal. Lennon's stream of consciousness. Images of broken light which dance before me like a million eyes. Evoking synesthesia, the repetition of Jai Guru Deva Om, a mantra anchoring chaos. This directness confronts the era's turmoil, 1968's assassinations, Vietnam drafts, the band's splintering. Yet the song affirms resilience, nothing changing the inner world amid external storm. Musically, the bridge's key shift to B minor introduces dissonance, chromatic descents mirroring slithering words, resolving back to D major in cathartic release. Paul's harmony vocals, stacking thirds and fifths, add warmth, their interplay a rare moment of unity amid discord. The mantra's placement, repeating like a chorus but evolving with each iteration, builds hypnotic effect, encouraging listeners to chant along and find personal solace. Instrumentally, the tambura's role can't be overstated. Its sympathetic strings vibrate in resonance, creating overtone series that enrich the harmonic field, much like a hurdy-gurdy's drone in folk traditions, but elevated to cosmic scale. George's sitar in the Wildlife version plucks raga-like phrases with Indian-inspired rhythms, subtly underlying the 4/4, introducing polyrhythmic subtlety. Ringo's percussion, toms tuned low for thunderous reverb, provides dynamic contrast, his fills in the verses accenting offbeats for propulsion without overwhelming. Paul's piano, with its block chords in root position, grounds the ether, occasional appoggiaturas adding tension before resolution. The tambura, sourced from George's collection, was mic'd closely to capture its buzzing timbre, the overtones interacting with Lennon's voice to create beating frequencies that add ethereal shimmer. The song's evolution reflects the Beatles' broader arc. From psychedelic experimentation in Sgt. Pepper to the raw introspection of the White Album, Across the Universe bridges them. Its 1968 birth amid Apple Corps' launch, symbolizing idealistic highs crashing into business realities. Lennon's frustration with the mixes, calling the early versions out-of-tune disappointments, highlights the realism. Masterpieces aren't born perfect, but wrestled into existence. This motivates. As players, we grind through takes, tweaking EQ to capture that elusive vibe, just as they did. The multiple releases stem from the Get Back sessions disarray, films capturing arguments that bled into the music, yet yielding gems like this. Emotionally, the track hits like a cosmic whisper, its mantra pulling you into meditation, the lyrics flow evoking eternal cycles that comfort amid loss. In live renditions like David Bowie's cover or Fiona Apple's raw take, the core endures, but the Beatles' versions, Wildlife's purity, Let It Be's grandeur, Naked's honesty, offer paths to personal resonance. Spin the Wildlife mix, feel the birdsong fade into tambura, and let it inspire your jams. Layer drones under your riffs, bend notes microtonally. Discover how simplicity births profundity. Bowie's 1975 version, with heavier guitars, amplifies the rock edge, while Apple's acoustic stripped-down take emphasizes lyrical intimacy. Across the Universe's genius lies in its adaptability, multiple releases showcasing variants that reward dissection. The charity version's lo-fi charm with fan vocals adding human imperfection. Spector's lush strings evoking Wagnerian leitmotifs. Naked's clarity revealing bass ostinatos that pulse like a heartbeat. Lennon's acoustic finger-picking, in Travis style with alternating bass, provides rhythmic foundation, his thumb steady while fingers pluck melodies in counterpoint. The finger-picking pattern, drawing from folk influences like Donovan, adds organic swing that contrasts the drone's steadiness. Culturally, it captured the late 60s zeitgeist, hippie idealism fraying into disillusion. Lennon's mantra, a shield against it, direct in admitting vulnerability without victimhood. George's contributions, often overlooked, infuse authenticity. His tambura playing, learned from Shankar, adds authentic raga flavor, the instrument's buzzing, sympathetic strings creating halo of overtones that envelop the mix. Shankar's influence extended beyond instruments, shaping Lennon's approach to melody as fluid and improvisational. As we peel layers, consider the recording tech. George Martin's engineering with tape loops for reversed sitar in early takes, though scrapped, influenced the ethereal quality. EMI's 4-track limitations forced creative bouncing, submixes compressing signals for that warm analog saturation we chase today. The limitations spurred innovation, like varispeeding tapes to alter pitch, used subtly here for dreamier effect. The song's legacy ripples. NASA's 2008 transmission into space literalizes its cosmic reach, while covers by Rufus Wainwright or the Scissor Sisters strip it to essentials, proving its bones stand strong. For prog lovers, it prefigures extended forms in Pink Floyd's Echoes, where drones build atmospheric vastness. Wainwright's orchestral take echoes Spectre, while Scissor Sisters' disco-infused version highlights the mantra's adaptability. Delving into harmony, the verse's IOAVV progression twists with modal borrowings, the flattened 7th borrowing from Dorian, creating bittersweet pull. The chorus's sustained resolves in plagal cadence, church-like but subverted by Eastern inflection. These choices create unresolved tension that mirrors life's flux. Ringo's understated drumming, with brushwork in quieter passages, adds texture. His cymbal swells mimicking wind, dynamic control masterful in avoiding clutter. The brushes used in the naked mix provide softer attack that enhances intimacy. Paul's bass, often in root 5th patterns, locks with drums, but occasional walks in the bridge add movement, harmonic support shifting to upper registers for lightness. His lines, played on the Rickenbacker, offer tonal brightness that cuts through the drone. Lennon's vocal delivery, double-tracked for depth, conveys detachment yet intimacy, slight vibrato on long notes adding expressiveness. The tracking, done in separate passes, allows for nuanced variations that build emotional layers. The Wildlife version's intro, with nature sounds, sets pastoral scene, transitioning to urban alienation in lyrics, juxtaposition poignant. The sounds, sourced from EMI's library, add narrative depth without words. Spector's harp and strings, arranged with sweeping arpeggios, add romanticism, but critics note it buries nuances, realism in production choices trade-offs. The harp, played by session musicians, glides through scales that evoke cascading stars. Naked's remix, by stripping, highlights acoustic purity, guitar's natural reverb from room mics capturing live feel. The room sound, from Studio 2's acoustics, adds warmth that's lost in digital edits. This multiplicity motivates exploration. Collect versions, A/B them, train your ear to timbral differences, apply to your music. Compare how the Wildlife's lo-fi contrasts Spector's hi-fi, each suiting different moods. Emotionally impactful, the song's mantra offers solace in repetition, a tool for mindfulness amid modern noise, its message timeless. Flow with change, nothing alters the core self. In turbulent times, it reminds us to find inner peace. George's sitar phrases in pentatonic subsets evoke Raga Yaman, evening mode for peace, aligning with lyric serenity. The raga choice, intentional ties to meditation practices. The fangirl's vocals, high and wavering, add innocence, contrasting Lennon's world weariness. Their inclusion, impromptu, humanizes the process. Tape speed variations in mixes alter pitch slightly. Wildlife slower for dreamier feel. Let it be brighter. These tweaks, post-production, fine-tune emotional tone. Martin's absence in later sessions left Glyn Johns' raw tapes, Spector overhauling, highlighting collaborative tensions that birthed brilliance. John's mixes, bootlegged, offer yet another variant for diehards. For instrumentalists, replicate the drone on synth or guitar pedal. Layer loops build your universes. Start with a single note, add layers, feel the build. The song's structure, verse-bridge chorus with extended outro, allows expansion, prog-like in potential. The outro's fading ohm invites infinite extension in live play. Lyrics is imagery, pools of sorrow, waves of joy, synesthetic, inspiring visual interpretations and covers. It sparks multi-sensory engagement. Its placement on Let It Be amid Get Back Project's fallout underscores resilience. The album's rooftop concert energy contrasts the song's introspection. Venturing further, the song's influence on later artists, U2's anthemic drones, Radiohead's ambient textures, shows its forward reach. U2's One echoes the mantra's unity theme. Technically, the 4-track bouncing created generational loss, adding grit that's part of the charm, analog warmth irreplaceable in digital. Paul's contributions, subtle, provide balance. His harmonies soften Lennon's edge, partnership shining through strife. Ringo's tom rolls, with natural decay, add organic pulse, his restraint a lesson in serving the song. George's tambura technique, bowing strings gently, creates varying intensity that builds dynamically. Lennon's guitar, a Gibson J160E, offers woody tone that grounds the mysticism. The Wildlife compilation's context, aiding conservation, ties the song to global awareness. Spector's choir, session singers, adds heavenly dimension, their ohms vibrating in harmony. Naked's bass prominence reveals Paul's melodic lines, often overlooked. Multiple mixes teach versioning's value. Remix your tracks, find new angles. The song's space transmission, beam toward Polaris, symbolizes eternal broadcast. Covers like Leibach's industrial take subvert the piece, showing versatility. Harmonically, the bridge's minor shift adds shadow, major return light, classic contrast. Drumming's offbeat accents create lift, subtle groove. Vocal double tracking adds phase, psychedelic swirl. Intro's birdsong, symbolic freedom. Harp glissandi, cascading release. Room reverb, live authenticity. This invites your immersion. Let the universe unfold in sound. As the ohm fades, Across the Universe lingers, inviting you to strum along. Feel the drone vibrate. Let it propel your creativity without restraint.